Angel was the daughter of Richard, a billionaire who spared no expense for his 60th birthday party. All her life, Angel had done whatever she wanted, and her father never punished her. In fact, he always covered up her bad behavior, making sure she never had to face consequences. On the night of the party, Angel noticed Andrew, the only black guest in the room, and immediately assumed he was in the wrong place, that he didn't belong. Her mind raced with assumptions, and without hesitation, she humiliated him in front of everyone, mocking him for being out of place in a circle of wealth and privilege. The moment of cruelty reached its peak when she threw champagne in his face, declaring he didn't belong there. What she didn't know was that Andrew had just closed a $520 million deal with her father. Richard, realizing what had happened, rushed to intervene, but it was too late. Andrew stormed out of the party, furious, and immediately canceled the multi-million-dollar contract. The room fell silent, the whispers of the guests filled with shock and judgment, and Angel was left to face the weight of her actions for the first time. But how did someone like Andrew, seemingly just another guest, end up holding the fate of her father's empire in his hands? And what would happen next as Angel was forced to confront the consequences she had never known? The story of privilege, accountability, and transformation is just beginning. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now let's understand how this story really started. The penthouse glittered like a crown atop Manhattan, a palace of glass and steel where the city lights stretched into infinity. Crystal chandeliers refracted gold across the room. Champagne towers gleamed under warm lighting, and the murmur of the elite created a soft, constant hum of approval and privilege. Richard Whitmore's 60th birthday gala was in full swing, a celebration of not just age, but of power, wealth, and influence. The city's most powerful and beautiful had assembled, draped in designer gowns and tailored suits, exuding confidence that came from inherited privilege. Laughter floated across the room, polite and calculated, mingling with the clink of flutes. But amid the shimmer of opulence, an undercurrent of tension unseen yet palpable was about to erupt. Angel Whitmore, 22, glided through the crowd like a figure sculpted from pure entitlement. Her dress shimmered with a price tag that could feed a small family for months. A gown of silk and sequins that caught every light, every eye. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, the kind of precision only endless hours and meticulous care could achieve. She moved with the practiced ease of someone who had never had to struggle. Brushing past waiters with a dismissive wave, her lips curved in a smile that was beautiful but laced with arrogance. Angel had spent her life knowing that the world bent for her. Every mistake she made, every slight against others had been erased by her father's wealth. Complaints vanished. Consequences were nothing more than temporary inconveniences. She had grown up untouchable, and in her mind, she was untouchable still. The glint of her eyes shifted suddenly as she scanned the room, landing on a lone figure who seemed incongruous in the glittering crowd. Andrew Carter, 30, approached the gathering with a quiet, grounded presence. His suit was modest but immaculately tailored, a nod to his success without screaming of extravagance. He moved with the assurance of someone who had earned every step of his journey, who had built a billion-dollar tech company from nothing, who remembered the long nights in Detroit when his mother worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. His warm smile greeted the doorman by name, and he nodded politely to familiar faces, acknowledging them with quiet charm. There was nothing flashy about Andrew. His dignity, his confidence radiated from a place of genuine humanity rather than inherited privilege. Angel's lips tightened, and her eyes narrowed. The only black face among a sea of white, he seemed almost like a shadow in the radiant space, yet he carried an air that dared not be ignored. Her voice cut through the hum of the room, sharp and incredulous. "Excuse me, are you lost? The service entrance is in the back." Andrew turned, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry," he asked, his voice calm, patient. Angel stepped closer, her disdain palpable, her posture deliberate and imposing. "This is a private event." "You clearly don't belong here," she hissed, letting the words hang in the air, venomous but controlled. The room shifted slightly, sensing the conflict without fully understanding it. Conversations dwindled. Heads turned. Whispers began. The air grew taut, the elegance of the party now overshadowed by tension. Andrew's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I'm a guest of Richard Whitmore. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." There was no fear in his tone, only a quiet assertion, a claim to his place without aggression. Angel laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut the air. "My father would never invite someone like you to his birthday party," she spat, her words dripping with cruelty that had been honed over a lifetime of indulgence. Before Andrew could respond, she reached for a champagne flute being carried past by a waiter. Time seemed to slow as she brought it up to his face. The golden liquid cascaded in a brilliant arc, drenching his suit, sliding down his shoulders, and splashing to the marble floor. Gasps erupted across the room. Conversations froze mid-word. The glittering environment of luxury became a stage for humiliation. "You don't belong in OUR world," she said, her voice rising, deliberate and venomous, ensuring every ear could hear. Richard Whitmore's expression turned from mild surprise to visible horror as he pushed through the frozen crowd. His face drained of color. "Angel, what have you done?" "That's Andrew Carter. He just signed our $520 million partnership." For a fraction of a second, Angel's smirk faltered, but it was fleeting. She had spent her life knowing she could dominate any situation, and yet a tiny flicker of unease danced across her mind, drowned quickly by entitlement and habit. Andrew wiped the champagne from his face slowly, deliberately. The warm, golden liquid clung to his skin and suit, a physical manifestation of the insult. Yet his eyes held a chill steel that belied the warmth they usually carried, had signed, Richard. "Past tense," he said evenly, pulling out his phone. Fingers flying, he typed, "Contract terminated effective immediately." Richard reached toward him, panic breaking his composed demeanor. "Andrew, please let me explain." But Andrew had already started walking toward the elevator, leaving a trail of golden drops behind him on the marble floor. Silence enveloped the room, thick and suffocating. Eyes followed every measured step until the doors slid shut, cutting him off from the chaos behind. Angel stood frozen, the champagne flute trembling in her hand, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. The weight of her father's horror pressed down upon her, something she had never truly felt before. Richard's voice cracked, raw with fury, the sound echoing against the walls like a thunderclap. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The party, once vibrant and sparkling, had transformed into a landscape of stunned faces, quiet judgment, and a lesson that would unfold far beyond the glittering walls of that angel's hands shook as her father's. Voice echoed through the now silent penthouse, reverberating in a way that made the crystal chandeliers tremble ever so slightly. The sound of Richard Whitmore's fury, barely restrained but impossibly sharp, filled the space between the golden walls and marble floors, cutting through the remnants of laughter and music. Her fingers twisted against each other, damp with nervous sweat, the delicate bracelets on her wrist clinking faintly. The faces around her, a sea of finely dressed. Well-mannered socialites and business moguls pretended not to stare, but the weight of their judgment pressed down like a cold hand. Whispered words drifted past her ears, soft enough not to carry clearly, yet loud enough for her imagination to exaggerate. "That poor man, I always knew she'd go too far." Every syllable felt like a strike against her, layering guilt atop the shock that still coursed through her body. Richard's hand gripped her arm. It was firm, unyielding, and entirely foreign to her. He had never touched her this way before, never needed to assert control over her so directly. His grip carried a gravity that silenced her questions, grounded her in the present, and left her unable to resist. "My office. Now," he commanded, his voice taut, edged with anger that barely stayed behind the surface. There was no room for argument. Angel followed, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing ominously in the cavernous space. Her mind raced in chaotic loops. Why was everyone acting like she had done something wrong? She had done what was right, exposed him, humiliated him, sure, but now? Now the world seemed to recoil from her. The door to Richard's office closed behind them with a thud that felt like a tomb sealing over her carefree existence. The warmth of the Gala disappeared, replaced by the dense, suffocating scent of polished mahogany and the faint trace of Richard's expensive cologne. His eyes, once a mirror of indulgent affection, burned with a controlled, almost unbearable intensity. He gestured to the space in front of him, demanding her attention, and his words cut through the silence like a blade. That man you just humiliated? He's revolutionizing renewable energy. His company is worth $8 billion. Angel crossed her arms, tilting her head in a mixture of incredulity and defensiveness. Daddy, you're overreacting. Just call him tomorrow and... Richard's face twisted, eyes narrowing. And what, Angel? Apologize for my daughter publicly degrading him because of the color of his skin? The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, resounding with a weight that made Angel falter. She had never heard her father speak to her this way, not about her mistakes, not about her behavior, never in a tone that stripped away her armor of entitlement and exposed her. He paced once, his shoes whispering against the floor, his hands running through his hair in a rare, almost human gesture of frustration. Our company needed that deal. We're hemorrhaging money on the solar farm project. Without Carter's technology, we'll lose everything. Angel's chest tightened. A flutter of genuine fear slipped past the arrogance she had carefully cultivated over 22 years. What do you mean, everything? She asked, her voice faltering despite herself. Richard's eyes, usually so measured and confident, reflected raw honesty now. I mean, we could lose $200 million. I mean, our reputation is destroyed. I mean, I just watched my daughter become the face of everything wrong with our world. The words were heavy, deliberate, each one a hammer striking at the fragile foundation of her certainty. She could hear the guests beginning to leave early, their footsteps and murmurs bleeding through the office door. The world outside her bubble of privilege no longer shielded her. Her father sank into his chair, an unusual vulnerability softening his stern posture. I've protected you your whole life. Paid off the girl you bullied in prep school. Buried the DUI. Made the assault allegation disappear, he said, his voice lower now, almost a confession. Angel's face flushed. Hearing her transgressions catalogued aloud in such specificity, from her father's lips, was something she had never anticipated. The weight of her past cruelty, hidden beneath layers of wealth and indulgence, pressed down on her chest like lead. But this... I can't fix this, Angel. I won't. She stared at him, unable to mask the first tremor of real comprehension. He had never looked so defeated, so hollowed out by disappointment. Something fragile inside her, a shield forged over years of entitlement, cracked. I'll call him tomorrow and make this right, Richard said quietly, almost to himself. The words were meant to reassure, but instead they underscored the enormity of her failure. Angel left the office, her steps hesitant, and as she passed by the coat check, she overheard two voices, laced with judgment and thinly veiled satisfaction. Did you see his face? So dignified, even covered in champagne, one whispered. Richard should disown her. That behavior was absolutely vile, the other replied. Her chest tightened, a sensation unfamiliar and uncomfortable. For the first time, she felt the sting of the world seeing her not as the untouchable heiress, but as a flawed human being. She checked her phone and froze as her worst fears materialized. Social media was exploding. Videos of the incident, taken from every conceivable angle, circulated with staggering speed. Comments flew like arrows, barbed and sharp, disgusting behavior. Racist, entitled brat. This is why they hate us. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled, each swipe magnifying her shame. The applause, the admiration, the laughter she was used to had vanished into a collective judgment that could not be paid off, smoothed over, or erased. She had always believed wealth and charm were shields against consequence. Yet here, for the first time, she felt exposed. Alone in the center of a world she thought belonged to her. Angel Whitmore discovered the raw, unfiltered weight of responsibility. It pressed against her chest and forced her to confront something she had never faced before. The undeniable truth that privilege could not protect her from the pain of her own actions. Andrew sat in his downtown loft, the city stretching below him like a sea of glittering glass and neon veins, a pulse that never seemed to stop. The lights blurred through the floor-to-ceiling windows, smeared into long streaks as if the city itself were weeping, reflecting the storm of frustration and disbelief swirling in his mind. His fingers drummed on the cool, polished surface of the table, a rhythm born of impatience and exhaustion. He tried to focus, to anchor himself in the tangible reality of his work, but it was impossible to ignore the creeping sense of injustice. Maya, his assistant since the earliest days of the startup, stepped quietly into the loft, the scent of freshly brewed coffee trailing behind her. She moved with the calm precision of someone who had seen him at both his lowest and highest points, a presence that grounded him in the chaos of his life. Placing the steaming cup in front of him, she spoke softly, her voice careful, almost hesitant. "The video has 12 million views," she said. "The internet is on your side." Andrew shook his head, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "I don't want sides, Maya," he said, the words low and taut. "I just wanted to do good work." He pressed his palm against his forehead, closing his eyes as the memory of his mother came unbidden. She had been a nurse, a woman of quiet dignity and endless patience, teaching him from the beginning to lead with kindness, to see the best in people, to extend grace even when the world offered none in return. "She proved what I already knew," he whispered to himself, thinking of the man humiliated by Angel's cruelty. "Some people see my bank account and my decrees, but all they'll ever see is my skin." The thought was like a shard lodged in his chest, sharp and unwelcome. He had imagined that progress, merit, and kindness would shield him from such scorn. But no measure of achievement could erase the simple, immutable reality of prejudice. Maya slid onto the edge of the sofa beside him, a hand brushing his arm with gentle reassurance. "So what now?" she asked. "The contract's terminated. We move on?" Her voice carried a softness, a question that invited reflection, but not immediate resolution. Andrew looked at the contract displayed on his laptop, the numbers screaming in cold black and white. $520 million, 50,000 jobs created, clean energy for 3 entire states. He saw the faces behind those figures, the families who would have worked those jobs, the communities that would have thrived. And all of it, he realized with a knot in his stomach, had been jeopardized because one spoiled woman could not see past her prejudice. His phone vibrated, slicing through the room's heavy quiet. He ignored it. Another call, another vibration. By 8 o'clock in the morning, Richard Whitmore had called 17 times. Each attempt felt like a hammer striking against a wound that had barely begun to scab over. Andrew let the 18th call ring long enough to sink deep into voicemail before finally answering. "Andrew, thank God, I'm downstairs. Please, just give me 5 minutes," Richard said, his voice raw and unpolished. There was a vulnerability there that Andrew did not expect, a tremor beneath the power and control usually radiating from the man. Against his better judgment, Andrew agreed. When Richard entered, he looked haggard, his tailored suit wrinkled as though he had spent the night in restless torment. His eyes were red, bloodshot from sleepless hours, a man stripped of his usual armor of confidence and entitlement. "I didn't sleep," he admitted quietly, almost ashamedly. "I've been trying to figure out how to fix this, and the truth is, I can't." Andrew remained standing, arms crossed, studying him with the cool detachment that had become his shield. "What Angel did was unforgivable," Richard continued, "but Andrew, I'm asking you to consider the 50,000 people who need those jobs. The communities. Communities like mine?" Andrew interrupted, the words sharp, each syllable heavy with memory and anger. "Communities your daughter thinks don't belong in her world?" Richard's shoulders slumped. The pride and defiance usually so evident in him seemed to crumble under the weight of Andrew's accusation. "You're right," he said softly. "And I'm the one who created her. Every time she did something cruel, I covered it up, paid it off, taught her there were no consequences." Andrew noticed something unexpected in Richard's eyes, a depth of genuine shame, a recognition of failure that transcended his usual power. "I want to make this right," Richard admitted, "but not by bribing you or begging. I want to teach my daughter what I should have taught her 22 years ago." Andrew's curiosity piqued despite the simmering anger in his chest. "Go on," he prompted, leaning slightly toward the older man, the tension between them sharp but tempered by the weight of the stakes. "Help me humble her," Richard said, his voice firm but tinged with desperation. "Show her what real consequences look like. And maybe we can salvage the deal." Andrew moved to the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes as he wrestled with conflicting impulses. His mother's voice whispered in his mind about forgiveness, about the quiet power of teaching rather than punishing, but the embers of anger and hurt still burned fiercely. "You want me to help you punish your own daughter?" he asked finally, the words tasting bitter. Richard shook his head, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "I want you to help me save her from herself," he corrected gently, "before she becomes someone beyond redemption." Andrew turned, searching Richard's face for any hint of deception, any trace of the old arrogance that might undermine the sincerity in his plea. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. And in that moment, a fragile bridge formed between two men who had every reason to be adversaries, built on a shared recognition of human frailty, accountability, and the slim hope that change real, lasting change was still possible. Richard pulled a leather-bound folder from the briefcase beside him, his hands trembling slightly despite the practiced control he had spent decades perfecting. He sat heavily in the chair, the weight of the morning pressing down on him like the city's skyline outside the window. The tremor in his fingers betrayed more than nerves. It betrayed fear, shame, and the desperate hope that something, anything, could undo the damage Angel had wrought. "Angel has never worked a day in her life," he began, voice low, measured, but carrying the gravity of a man confronting his own failings. "Lives in a penthouse I bought her. Drives cars I lease. Has credit cards I pay. Everything she has, everything she thinks she's earned, she hasn't." Andrew remained silent, his expression unreadable, the kind of stoicism that masked both curiosity and the simmering anger still nesting in his chest. The loft seemed impossibly quiet, the city's pulse outside reduced to a background murmur, leaving only the tension between the two men, fragile and taut as a drawn wire. Richard leaned forward, the creases of exhaustion deepening on his face. "Tomorrow, I'm cutting her off. Completely. No money, no apartment, no car, no safety net." His voice carried the finality of a judge delivering a sentence, and Andrew's eyebrows rose despite himself. This was more severe than he expected, more ruthless than any test he had imagined for Angel, and yet the truth of it was undeniable. He could almost see her, for the first time, stripped of privilege, forced to confront the ordinary world in all its unpredictability and unvarnished truth. Richard took a deep breath, straightening slightly. But here's where you come in. I want you to hire her. Andrew blinked. Excuse me? He said, disbelief coloring his tone. For a fraction of a second, he almost laughed, the absurdity of the proposition hanging in the room like stale champagne. I want you to hire her at your company, entry level, minimum wage. Let her learn what real work is. Let her learn what real people are like. Richard's eyes met Andrew's, fierce in their sincerity. No special treatment, no safety nets. She earns her place or she loses it. Andrew's steps echoed against the loft's hardwood floors as he paced, wrestling with the audacity of the plan. Richard, your daughter hates me. Why would she work for me? His voice was a mixture of incredulity and simmering anger. She can't stand me. She's spent her whole life dismissing people like me, people she assumes don't belong in her world. Richard's jaw tightened, his voice unwavering. Because she have no choice. I'll tell her it's the only way back into my life. She either works for you for 6 months, or she's on her own forever. No apartment, no car, no credit cards, no family support. She'll have to face the world as it is. The proposal was audacious, cruel even, yet there was an undeniable justice to it. Andrew's mind whirred. The weight of moral obligation pressing against the practical considerations of business, fairness, and accountability. And what do I get? Andrew asked slowly, a skeptical edge to his tone. Besides an employee who despises me? Richard met his eyes, steady, unwavering. If she lasts 6 months, genuinely changes, learns humility. I'll not only restore our $520 million deal, I'll increase it to $750 million. Andrew froze, imagining the transformation such a sum could make, the additional funds providing clean energy infrastructure, jobs, and hope for thousands more. The potential to expand the benefits to 5 more cities danced tantalizingly in his mind, a vision that almost eclipsed the personal indignation that still burned beneath the surface. But Richard added, you will have full authority over her. She reports directly to you. If she fails, quits, or doesn't change, the deal dies forever. Andrew let the words settle, imagining the scene. Angel, forced into unfamiliar routines, humbled, her entitlement stripped away piece by piece under his watchful eye. So you're betting your company's future on your daughter's ability to not be terrible? I'm betting on you, Richard said simply, his tone carrying both respect and a quiet desperation. You're a good man, Andrew. I've researched you. I know the way you work, how you mentor kids from rough neighborhoods, how you built a company that actually cares about people. She needs that example. She needs you. Andrew thought of the humiliation etched across Angel's face that night, the champagne dripping, the arrogance unraveling in real time, the sting of racism and entitlement laid bare. And yet, he also heard his mother's gentle voice in his head. Some people hurt because they've never been taught better. Lead with patience. Teach them when they can't see for themselves. He inhaled slowly, the decision stretching taut inside him, a delicate balance between justice, education, and responsibility. I'll do it, he said finally, each word deliberate, measured, but on my terms. Real work, real consequences, no special treatment. Richard extended a hand and Andrew studied it, the gesture symbolic yet weighty with potential outcomes. Agreed, Richard said. Andrew's gaze hardened. And Richard? If she says one racist thing, shows 1 ounce of that entitlement toward my employees, people I care about, she's done. Deal's off. Forever. Richard nodded solemnly. Fair. When she starts, she won't know about our arrangement, just that she needs a job and you're the only one hiring. The rest she'll learn for herself. They shook hands, a quiet understanding passing between them, a bridge forged through mutual recognition of human frailty, accountability, and the hope that growth, however forced, could be achieved. As Richard left, he paused at the door, his voice breaking the silence with quiet gratitude. "Andrew, thank you for giving her and me a chance we don't deserve." Alone again, Andrew sat down and exhaled, reaching for his phone. He called Maya, the weight of the morning finally finding its outlet in words tinged with disbelief and tentative hope. "You're not going to believe what I just agreed to," he said, his voice carrying the tension of responsibility, the fragility of trust, and the faint glimmer of redemption. Angel awoke to the familiar soft hum of the city below, the sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, gilding the room with golden warmth. For a moment, she allowed herself to sink back into the comfort of routine, the way her silk sheets smelled faintly of lavender, the way her plush pillows cradled her head like a constant, unchallenged affirmation that the world would bend to her. Then, through the morning haze, she saw him, Richard Whitmore, sitting in the living room, his expression unreadable, hands folded, a quiet storm in human form. "Daddy? What are you doing here?" "I thought you'd be," she began, her voice tinged with confusion and something closer to amusement, the kind that shields terror with a brittle laugh. "Pack a bag. You have 1 hour," he said, his voice stripped of warmth, careful, unflinching. Angel blinked, unsure if this was some cruel joke. One of those orchestrated interventions she had always laughed off at charity galas or socialite gatherings. "What are you talking about?" she said, attempting a smile that faltered mid-air like a bird with broken wings. "This apartment? Deeds being transferred today? Your car? Repossessed this afternoon? Your credit cards? Canceled 10 minutes ago." The words seemed to hover in the air, each one a scalpel cutting away the comforting illusions she had long taken for granted. The corners of her mouth trembled, an instinctive attempt to hold on to some shred of levity. "You're joking," she said, though her voice wavered. Richard rose slowly, pulling papers from his briefcase. The faint rustle of legal documents was the sound of a verdict being pronounced. "You humiliated a good man. You damaged our family's reputation irreparably. But worse, you revealed a darkness in yourself I can no longer ignore." The room tilted slightly for Angel, as though gravity itself had shifted. Her voice rose, a mixture of indignation and panic. "Daddy, you're being dramatic." "I'll apologize, okay? I'll call him and—" "It's too late for apologies, Angel. It's time for consequences," he said, the words landing like stones in a still pond, sending ripples through every part of her. She reached for her phone instinctively, dialing her private banking app. Each screen that blinked back at her seemed like a betrayal. Credit cards declined, accounts inaccessible, safety nets shredded. The panic swelled in her chest, a living entity she couldn't quiet. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered, the question almost inaudible to the echoing walls of her vast penthouse. Richard placed a business card on the gleaming marble counter. "Andrew Carter's company is hiring. Entry-level position. $15 an hour." Angel stared, her disbelief curdling into shock. "You want me to work for him? The man you assaulted and racially abused?" "Yes, that man," Richard replied calmly, but the weight behind the words was undeniable. "I won't do it," she said, arms crossed, attempting a posture of defiance that trembled beneath the surface, the edges of her ego fraying in ways she had never known. Richard moved toward the door, each step deliberate, a silent punctuation to the sentence he was closing. "Then, I wish you well in your new life. You have until noon before security changes the locks." Angel's scream erupted before she could measure it, a raw, unfiltered wail that echoed through the luxurious, now alien space. "Daddy!" Her voice ricocheted off the marble and glass, a sound carrying fear, anger, and disbelief. But he didn't turn around. The door closed softly behind him, leaving her for the first time in her life utterly, completely alone. She reached for her phone, dialing friends in rapid succession, each call met with voicemail, each beep hammering home the reality. Her reputation, her privileges, her life as she knew it, were collapsing. Desperation clawed at her chest as she attempted to access her mother's credit card. Her last lifeline declined. She sank to the couch, eyes scanning the opulence she had always assumed was her birthright. $15,000 couch, imported art, designer clothes, and realized with a hollow ache that she owned nothing. By 11 a.m., Angel was on the street, 2 suitcases heavy in her trembling hands. Her phone a dying ember at 12% battery. The city moved around her, indifferent, a reflection of the world she had never truly understood. A former friend drove past, made eye contact, then turned away, swallowed by the indifferent flow of traffic. Her hands shook as she pulled Andrew's business card from her purse, the edges sharp and foreign against her fingers. She dialed, each ring an eternity, each pause a chasm between pride and survival. Andrew Carter's office, a professional female voice answered, crisp, detached, but not unkind. I need to speak with Mr. Carter about employment, Angel stammered, the words tasting like ashes on her tongue. There was a pause. Then, your name? Angel swallowed her pride, the words trembling out of her lips. Angel Whitmore. Another pause, longer this time, as though the person on the other end was measuring her worth, weighing her desperation against the syllables of her name. Please hold. Andrew's voice came on, calm, measured, almost unsettling in its steadiness. Miss Whitmore. Interesting timing. My father said you're hiring, she forced out, each word a tiny surrender of ego. I am. Entry-level data processing. $15 an hour. 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. No special treatment, he replied, his voice unflinching, a mirror of the world she had never had to inhabit. Angel closed her eyes, the gravity of the schedule pressing against her like a physical weight. 7 a.m.? She hadn't woken up before noon in years. The luxury of time, of privilege, had been stripped away with surgical precision. When do I start? She whispered, hating every syllable, hating the submission in her tone, hating the vulnerability she could no longer disguise. And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the humiliation, a small ember of something else flickered, an unacknowledged, trembling curiosity about the life that awaited her beyond the walls of entitlement. For the first time, Angel Whitmore faced a future entirely her own, and the world, indifferent and vast, waited for her to step into it. Angel stood outside the sleek, glass-fronted entrance of Carter Tech Solutions at 6:45 a.m., the early morning city lights stretching across the streets like a muted celebration of lives that carried on as if hers had never mattered. The cold wind tugged at her hair, tousling strands she hadn't had the energy or the time to tame. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, feeling the scuffing of her designer heels against the cracked sidewalk, a sharp reminder that fashion, for once, offered no protection. Her silk blouse clung uncomfortably to her skin in the chill, her tailored skirt stiff, and her overall presence screamed alien amidst the modestly dressed employees streaming past her, their coffee cups and reusable mugs in hand, chatting lightly, a cadence of normalcy she no longer belonged to. Her mind reeled as she thought about the night before, spent in a budget motel with the flickering neon sign outside her window, casting long, anxious shadows across the cracked carpet. 3 hours of sleep, the remnants of anxiety still clinging to her eyelids, and not a morsel of a decent breakfast to soften the sting of the morning. 12 blocks walked, blisters forming like tiny betrayals on the soles of her feet. She inhaled deeply, trying to summon some semblance of composure, but the sharp ache in her calves reminded her that comfort was now a memory. Maya, Andrew's assistant and a professional Angel had only ever seen in polished emails, appeared at the reception desk with her clipboard and a quiet authority that made Angel shrink slightly under the weight of its confidence. "Miss Whitmore?" "Follow me," she said softly, her tone neither welcoming nor judgmental, simply factual. Angel followed, heels clicking against the polished concrete floors, drawing stares from people whose faces reflected curiosity, recognition, or perhaps amusement. Some recognized her from the viral video that had left her reputation in tatters overnight. Whispered comments brushed past her in invisible current snippets she imagined, seeing judgment in every raised eyebrow, every lingering glance. The office was a modern, open-concept space, alive with quiet energy. Desks arranged in neat rows, diverse faces focused on screens, fingers tapping keys, and occasional low murmurs of collaboration. Angel's gaze drifted from one workstation to another, absorbing the hum of industriousness she had never participated in. Every glance in her direction felt like an accusation, a reminder that she was the spectacle, the anomaly, the cautionary tale in this microcosm of normalcy. Maya led her to a cubicle tucked into the back corner. "Your workstation. Computer, headset, training manual," she said, gesturing to the cramped space with a precise, detached kindness. Angel's eyes darted around, panic starting to seep in like cold water through her bones. Where do I put my things?" she asked, voice trembling despite her best effort at composure. "There's a hook," Maya said, pointing to a small peg on the side of the cubicle wall. "Everyone uses lockers downstairs for valuables." Angel's gaze lingered on the minuscule space, so alien to the penthouse she had called home, where every item had been chosen to signal taste, wealth, and distinction. Here, she had a hook and a chair. A chair she hadn't tested for comfort, a computer whose power button was still a mystery. "Mr. Carter will brief you at 7 a.m. sharp." "Don't be late," Maya said, leaving Angel alone with her thoughts and the hum of activity around her. Angel sank into the chair, the $800 heels already biting into her feet, the skin tender and angry. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in a shaky breath. She had never faced this kind of vulnerability, this exposure, not in her meticulously controlled life. At precisely 7, Andrew appeared at her cubicle, casual in jeans and a button-down shirt, a striking contrast to Angel's overdressed, carefully curated appearance. His calm, professional demeanor was a quiet assertion of authority. "Miss Whitmore, welcome to Carter Tech. You'll be processing data entry for our renewable energy projects," he said. His tone neutral, controlled, devoid of any trace of the man she had humiliated the night before. Her voice came out small, almost hesitant. "I don't know how to. I've never done data entry." "Then you'll learn," Andrew said simply. "Jerome here will train you." He gestured to a young black man in the next cubicle, who offered a warm, tentative smile. Jerome extended his hand. "Hey, welcome to the team," he said, his voice friendly yet cautious. Angel hesitated, her hand hovering awkwardly before briefly shaking his. She had never been in this position before, never had to extend respect rather than receive admiration or fear. Jerome's smile faltered just slightly, but he maintained professionalism. Andrew's gaze shifted toward her, piercing but measured. "Problem, Miss Whitmore?" "No," she forced out, nodding, swallowing the flicker of shame rising in her chest. Andrew leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to impress its weight. "Jerome graduated top of his class from MIT. He's one of our best. You'll learn from him, respect him, and treat him like the professional he is. Understood?" Angel's head nodded, her pride clashing with the unfamiliar sensation of being in the subordinate role, her entire identity realigning in a matter of moments. Good. You get 30 minutes for lunch, 2 10-minute breaks, no personal calls during work hours. He walked away, leaving Angel to process the tremor in her limbs, the unfamiliar fatigue gnawing at her resolve. Jerome pulled up a chair beside her, gesturing to the screen. Data entry isn't hard, but it's tedious. You'll be inputting solar panel efficiency rates, noting readings, tracking performance metrics, he explained, patient and calm. Angel's mind glazed over as she processed the information. 8 hours of this? 8 hours of sitting, of typing, of learning a rhythm entirely foreign to her privileged existence. By 10, her back ached, her eyes stung from staring at the screen. 17 mistakes recorded, each corrected with Jerome's unflappable patience. The enormity of her failure settled in her chest like a weight she had never borne before. Lunch came, a single stark reminder of reality. She opened her wallet, $47 until her first paycheck in 2 weeks. A $6 sandwich later, she sat alone. The laughter and conversation of her coworkers a distant soundtrack to her isolation. No one invited her to join. She remained a spectator to a world that moved without her. She checked her phone in a ritual of both hope and dread. Her social media, once a platform of admiration and envy, had plummeted from 500,000 followers to barely 12,000. Comments scrolled past, brutal and merciless. Karma's a bitch. She deserves worse. Racist, getting what she earned. The words stung, not just because of their accuracy, but because for the first time, there was no one to shield her from the reflection staring back through the screen. Angel stared at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of the cafeteria tray, and realized something undeniable. The world she had inhabited, the world that had coddled her, was gone. For the first time, she was invisible, yet painfully exposed. And beneath the shame, beneath the exhaustion and the humiliation, a faint pulse of something new began to stir. A curiosity, fragile and trembling, about what it might mean to live in the truth, to finally see the world through unshielded eyes. 2 weeks passed like a relentless storm, each day bleeding into the next with the same monotony and exhaustion, leaving Angel physically drained and emotionally raw. The initial shock of losing her penthouse, her cars, and her credit cards had given way to the steady ache of reality. She now wore simple, affordable clothes, jeans, t-shirts, sneakers, everything she had been able to scrape together at Target. Her designer wardrobe was gone, donated, or locked behind the iron gates of her former life. Her manicured nails were chipped, the polish long gone. Her highlighted hair revealed dark roots she could no longer maintain. Her skin, usually flawless under layers of expensive creams, broke out in angry patches along her jawline and forehead. 8 pounds had slipped away over the fortnight, the result of missed meals, cheap sandwiches, and the gnawing stress of her new existence. The work itself was hypnotically tedious. Day after day she stared at spreadsheets, entering numbers, cross-checking data, correcting errors, watching rows and columns scroll past like a river she could not step out of. The tasks were simple but unending, mechanical motions that left her mind both blank and exhausted. Her hands ached from typing, her eyes strained from the glowing monitors, and every muscle in her back seemed permanently knotted from sitting in the unforgiving office chairs. Yet even as her body protested, the isolation cut deeper. Whispers she imagined or overheard lingered in the corners of the open concept office. No one approached her. No one included her in lunches or casual chats. She was the girl from the viral video, the racist brat whose humiliation was still circulating online. And the world seemed to agree unanimously that she deserved her solitude. Jerome remained at her side in a professional capacity, patient, firm, and polite. Yet the warmth he showed others, the subtle encouragements and friendly smiles were tempered when directed toward her. Each correction of her mistakes carried the weight of professionalism, not forgiveness. Each instruction reminded her that she was learning the craft not as an equal, but as someone who had to earn respect, who had to crawl through the discomfort of humility to even begin to understand. During a team meeting that Wednesday morning, the stark contrast of her new reality hit her with quiet clarity. Andrew stood at the head of the room, smiling at the group with pride. "Great work on the Riverside project, everyone," he announced. "Because of your data accuracy, we're bringing clean energy to 5,000 low-income homes this month. Families that have never had access to reliable energy will now see lights flick on, refrigerators running, children studying without candles." The team erupted in cheers and high fives, a wave of genuine joy and accomplishment that washed over the room. Angel watched, something inside her stirring uncomfortably, like guilt mixing with awe. For the first time, the work she had found so dull, so inconsequential, suddenly mattered. She had contributed, in her own small, painstaking way, to a project that touched thousands of lives. After the meeting, she lingered, summoning courage she didn't fully feel. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice low, tentative. Andrew looked up from his notes, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, Miss Whitmore?" She followed him into his office, and the contrast with her father's penthouse struck her immediately. This space was humble. No mahogany desks, no gilded chairs, no opulent view of the city skyline. Photos of Andrew at community centers, shaking hands with children, helping build playgrounds, lined the walls. It was a space of purpose, not performance. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm, professional but not cold. He didn't offer her a seat, a subtle assertion of the professional dynamic that had been absent from her life until now. I wanted to apologize," she began, swallowing the lump in her throat. "For what I did at the party." Andrew's expression didn't change. "Okay," he said simply. "That's it? Just okay?" Angel's voice cracked, a mix of frustration, shame, and yearning for absolution. He leaned against his desk, the first subtle sign of his personal presence. "What do you want me to say? That I forgive you? That we're good now?" Her eyes stung as unshed tears pooled. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't know. That I was rich?" he interrupted, his voice steady but sharp. "So if I had been a waiter, your behavior would have been acceptable." Her throat closed, words failing her. "You're apologizing because you're suffering consequences, not because you understand what you did was wrong," he continued, softer now, but firm. "That's not fair." Angel's voice cracked as tears slipped down her cheeks. "Fair?" Andrew's calm broke, just a fraction, his frustration breaking through the measured exterior. "You threw champagne in my face. You told me I didn't belong in your world because of my skin. My mother cleaned houses in neighborhoods like yours, got paid under minimum wage, treated like she was invisible." He stepped closer, the weight of his words pressing into her, not with anger, but truth. "Do you know why I started this company? So people like my mother never have to bow to people like you again." Angel was crying openly now, her chest tight with the bitter, unfamiliar taste of remorse. I don't know how to be different. I don't know how to fix this." Andrew's expression softened slightly, a glimmer of empathy cutting through his disappointment. "Start by actually seeing people. Jerome isn't just your trainer, he's a person. He has dreams, a little sister he's putting through college, a mother who survived cancer." "I didn't know," she whispered. "Because you never asked. You never saw past your own prejudices," he said gently, yet with the force of undeniable truth. That night, in her tiny studio apartment, shared with a roommate she had found on Craigslist to save on rent, Angel lay awake for the first time without the distractions of privilege shielding her. She reflected on the countless people she had overlooked, ignored, or dismissed. She thought about the housekeeper her father had employed for 20 years. What was her name? She realized she had never asked, never cared to know, never recognized her as human. The next morning, as sunlight crept through the small blinds, Angel arrived at the office early. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached Jerome's cubicle, hands trembling. "Jerome?" she called softly, her voice tentative. Can I buy you coffee? I want to start over." For the first time, there was no pretense, no arrogance, no entitlement. There was only humility, an open-handed attempt to connect, to see, to understand. And in that small, trembling gesture, the fragile beginnings of transformation took root. The break room was quiet at 6:30 a.m., the fluorescent lights humming softly, the smell of coffee lingering in the air like a promise of routine. Angel perched on a plastic chair, clutching a steaming mug, her hands still shaky from the awkwardness of asking Jerome out for coffee. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, dark eyes fixed on her with a caution that made her stomach twist. "Why?" he asked finally, the single word heavy with suspicion. Angel swallowed hard, staring at the surface of her mug as if the swirls in the coffee could give her courage. "Because Mr. Carter was right," she said softly. "I don't know anything about you except that you're good at your job." Jerome tilted his head, stirring his coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. "You want to know about me? Or you want to feel better about yourself?" His tone wasn't accusatory, it was probing, like he was challenging the sincerity of her small, awkward attempt. Angel flinched at his directness, a flash of shame burning her cheeks. "Maybe both? I don't know. I'm trying." There was a pause, a quiet that felt heavier than any noise. Then Jerome, after a long moment, slid his back against the counter and let out a small breath. "Okay, I'm from Southside Chicago," he began, his voice calm, almost wistful. "My dad died when I was 12. Mom worked as a nurse, beat cancer twice. Little sisters pre-med at Howard." Angel listened, really listened, her eyes widening as she drank in the ordinary humanity of someone she had never seen before. She noticed the subtle pride in his voice, the weight of hardship tempered by determination. "I got a full ride to MIT, graduated in 3 years. Wanted to work somewhere that actually made a difference, not just made rich people richer," he said, a small smile flickering as he spoke of purpose rather than wealth. "Why Carter Tech?" Angel asked softly, hesitant, like her curiosity itself might betray her ignorance. Jerome's face brightened, memories lifting the corners of his mouth. "Andrew came to my neighborhood when I was 17. Career day at our underfunded high school that most CEOs wouldn't even drive through." He pulled out his phone, swiping to a photo teenage Jerome, wide-eyed and nervous, standing next to a younger Andrew, who smiled warmly. "He told us, 'Your zip code doesn't determine your destiny.' He funded my SAT prep, wrote my recommendation letter. He saved my life," Jerome said quietly. Angel felt something fracture deep in her chest, a crack that released a raw, unfamiliar shame. The shame wasn't about her job, or the mistakes she made, or the blisters on her feet. It was the memory of her own ignorance, her own cruelty. She saw, for the first time with clarity, the man she had humiliated at the party. Not a target, not a symbol, not a social media moment. Just a man who had devoted his life to helping people like Jerome. That man. "He's a hero to people like me," she whispered, barely audible. In the weeks that followed, Angel's transformation was gradual but undeniable. She began bringing extra portions from her modest lunch, sharing them with Jerome when he forgot his own. She learned her roommate's story, discovering the struggles of a single mother juggling nursing school and 2 part-time jobs, and began to understand the sacrifices that went unseen by someone like her. Angel volunteered to stay late, helping the team meet deadlines. Her fingers cramped from hours of data entry, her body aching, but her pride in service slowly growing. Andrew watched quietly from his office, noting the small, almost imperceptible changes. The way Angel smiled briefly when Marcus from maintenance thanked her. The way she held herself less rigidly when talking to colleagues. the humility that was beginning to temper her old arrogance. One Friday afternoon, he called her into his office. "Your work has improved." "No errors this week," he said, matter of fact, testing her ability to receive acknowledgement without arrogance. Angel felt a flicker of pride and almost smiled. "Thank you," she murmured. Andrew leaned forward, his eyes sharp, his tone calm but pointed. "But I'm not talking about data entry. I'm talking about how you treated Marcus from maintenance yesterday." Her chest tightened, and she remembered the moment vividly. Marcus had tipped his cart over, scattering papers across the floor. Without thinking, she had knelt beside him, helping him gather the sheets, brushing the dust from his sleeves. "He told me you were kind." "Asked about his kids," Andrew continued. "He has 3 daughters," Angel said softly. "The youngest wants to be an astronaut." The words surprised her, the warmth in her own voice a sign of a subtle shift within her. Andrew studied her closely. "You're starting to see people." That evening, the phone rang in Angel's modest studio apartment. She picked it up, surprised to see her father's name flashing. It had been 6 weeks since their last conversation, and the hesitancy in his tone mirrored the unease in her own chest. "How are you?" Richard asked cautiously. Angel glanced around the small space, her thrift store clothes. The peeling paint, the modest kitchen, and the exhaustion etched into her reflection in the darkened window. I think I'm becoming human," she said, the words tasting strange but true on her tongue. She recounted her weeks at Carter Tech, talking about Jerome, about Marcus, about understanding for the first time what living on a minimum wage meant, making impossible choices between groceries and metro fare. Seeing the world through eyes that were not privileged, not protected. "I've been so blind, Daddy, so cruel. I had everything and I saw nothing," she confessed, her voice breaking under the weight of genuine regret. There was a pause on the other end, then his voice cracked softly. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." Unbeknownst to her, Andrew was listening. Richard's phone was on speaker in his office, a quiet presence beside him as he observed the subtle threads of transformation unraveling in Angel. The 2 men exchanged a glance, words unspoken, plans unfolding. The experiment was working, the lessons were taking hold, but there remained one final test, the ultimate measure of whether Angel could truly see, empathize, and grow beyond the life she had once known. The hum of the office, the faint click of keyboards, the distant laughter of colleagues, these sounds, once meaningless background noise to her old life, now signaled a world she had finally begun to understand. A world she was learning to navigate not as an entitled observer, but as a participant, a witness, and perhaps, eventually, a force for good. Angel sat at her small kitchen table, the morning sunlight filtering through the blinds and casting narrow stripes across the stack of unpaid bills and her laptop. The coffee in her mug had gone cold, but she barely noticed. Her mind was already elsewhere, rehearsing the day ahead. 3 months had passed since she first walked through the glass doors of Carter Tech Solutions. 3 months of awkward introductions, early mornings, long data entry sessions, and slow, painstaking lessons in humility. She had changed. She could feel it in the way her chest no longer puffed up at attention. The way she actually looked at people, listened to their stories, asked questions that weren't about her own status. Her designer wardrobe was long gone, replaced by practical basics from discount stores. Her hands rougher, nails chipped, hair no longer perfectly styled, and yet she felt lighter, somehow. She had friends now, our own Marcus, and a handful of colleagues who had warmed to her quiet determination and willingness to work. She had even started volunteering at the community center Andrew had founded, teaching kids to input data for small local projects, helping them see that effort and care could ripple outwards. She had come to understand what real work felt like, what real responsibility meant. Yet, as she walked into the office that Monday morning, there was a tightness in her stomach, a flicker of unease she couldn't shake. Andrew's office door was closed, and when his assistant Maya called her in, her steps faltered, heart hammering. She entered to find Andrew standing behind his desk, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Miss Whitmore, we need to discuss something," he said, his tone unusually serious, a weight in the words that made her pulse quicken. Her stomach dropped. "Okay. What's this about?" "I'm letting you go. Effective immediately." The words hit her like a thunderclap. The air in the office seemed to vanish, leaving her breathless. "What? Why? Did I do something wrong?" Her voice cracked, disbelief and fear threading through every syllable. "Your performance is adequate," Andrew said, his voice calm but firm. "But we're restructuring. Budget cuts. Last hired, first fired. First fired." Angel's mind scrambled. This job wasn't just work. It was survival. Every paycheck had been stretched to pay rent, buy groceries, cover transportation. Every small effort had been a step toward independence, toward proving she could exist without the golden cocoon her father had provided. "Please, Mr. Carter, I'll work harder. I'll take a pay cut. She began, desperation rising. "Decision's final. Maya will process your exit paperwork," he interrupted. There was no malice in his words, only the weight of finality, and Angel felt the walls of her world closing in. Her legs felt like lead as she stumbled out of his office, vision blurring with tears. She tried to blink them away, to hold herself together, but the sting of humiliation and fear gnawed at her. Jerome appeared in the hallway just as she was about to sink to the floor. "Angel? What happened?" I'm fired," she managed, voice barely a whisper. "Budget cuts." Jerome's face fell, confusion and concern mingling. "But you're one of our best now. That doesn't make sense." Angel shook her head, unable to answer. She trudged home, each step heavier than the last. In her empty apartment, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bare walls, the thrift store furniture, and the reality of her situation. For the first time, she considered what it meant to have nothing, no connections, no money, no backup plan. She thought about Marcus and his 3 daughters, about Jerome's mother working double shifts, about all the people she had once overlooked, ignored, or judged. She didn't call her father. She didn't want to. Pride and genuine transformation had tempered her instinct to reach for the lifeline she once took for granted. Instead, she opened her laptop and began the painstaking process of updating her resume, applying to every data entry position she could find. But the world hadn't forgotten her. Everywhere she applied, the viral video from the penthouse party followed her like a shadow. "Aren't you the champagne girl?" employers whispered. Social media comments resurfaced, mocking, condemning, reminding her of the life she had lost and the mistakes she had made. Days passed, then a week. Her savings dwindled to $47. The rent notice loomed over her head. Hunger gnawed at her ribs. On the 10th day, shivering and exhausted, she swallowed her pride and joined a line at the local food bank sponsored by Andrew's company. The line moved slowly, people around her weary but patient. Angel's heart sank as she watched families, single parents, elderly citizens received the assistance she had come to rely on for sustenance. She clutched her empty canvas tote, wishing she could disappear, wishing she hadn't made herself so visible, wishing she could turn back time. Then, across the room, she saw him. Andrew, volunteering, hands outstretched, lifting boxes, offering smiles, nodding encouragement. Their eyes met. The world seemed to pause. Angel wanted to run, to escape the shame, to hide behind her remaining dignity, but her body was too weak, too tired, too hungry. She reached the front of the line, trembling as Andrew handed her a box. She accepted it, voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." "Angel, wait," he called as she turned to leave. His tone wasn't chastising. It was measured, careful, patient. They stepped outside into the cold afternoon. The wind bit at her cheeks, the sky a pale gray, the weight of the past 3 months pressing down on her shoulders. "This was a test, wasn't it?" she said quietly, voice shaking. "You wanted to see what I'd do with nothing." Andrew didn't deny it. "I needed to know if your change was real or just survival instinct," he said, eyes searching hers. "And?" she asked, her heart pounding, breath shallow. "What did you learn?" He handed her an envelope, the paper crisp, weighty. "That you didn't call your father for money. You didn't lash out or blame others. You did what millions of people do every day. You kept trying." Angel's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a job offer. Assistant project manager, $65,000 a year, benefits included, a future to be built on her own merit. "You passed, Angel." "Not just my test, life's test," Andrew said softly, almost gently. Tears streamed down her face, uncontrolled, heartfelt. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Maybe not, but everyone deserves a second chance to be better," he replied, his words carrying the weight of hard-earned truth. For the first time in months, Angel felt the stirrings of hope, humility, and resolve intertwining in her chest. She understood now that dignity was earned, compassion cultivated, and life, in all its unpredictable cruelty and grace, demanded courage not just to survive, but to truly see, to truly change, and to truly rise. The wind shifted, and she inhaled deeply, tasting the possibility of a future built on choice, empathy, and the knowledge that real strength lay not in privilege, but in the willingness to grow beyond it. 6 months had passed since the night Angel had thrown champagne in Andrew Carter's face. The night that had changed everything. The memory still lingered in fragments, flashbulbs, whispers, the sting of humiliation, not for herself, but for the man whose dignity she had assaulted. She had carried that shame like a stone in her chest, heavy, unyielding, but also, strangely, clarifying. Each day since then had been a lesson, a challenge, a slow unraveling of the person she thought she was, and the painstaking construction of someone new. Tonight, she found herself standing in front of Richard Whitmore's penthouse once more. The building, grand and imposing, felt less like a fortress and more like a theater of memory. Her dress was modest, purchased with money she had earned on her own, a soft navy that hugged but did not flaunt. Her hair fell naturally around her shoulders, no elaborate curls or perfect highlights. Minimal makeup highlighted her features without drawing attention, because for the first time, she didn't need to command attention. She only needed to be present. The crowd inside was familiar, the same faces from the birthday party 6 months ago. Now bustling and business casual, champagne flutes in hand, murmuring about deals and market trends. The energy was different tonight, subtler, almost cautious, as if the air itself had been washed clean by the passage of time. Richard Whitmore stepped to the center of the room, the microphone in his hand feeling heavier than usual, weighed down by months of reflection and consequence. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice calm but measured. 6 months ago, I stood in this room and watched my daughter reveal the ugliest parts of our privilege. A murmur swept through the crowd, uncomfortable, some shifting in their seats. Eyes glanced sideways at Angel, who stood quietly, hands folded in front of her, steady despite the nerves churning in her stomach. "Tonight," Richard continued, a faint tremor of emotion breaking through, "I want to introduce you to someone different. Angel, would you join me?" Angel inhaled deeply, her chest tight with a mix of anxiety and resolve. She walked to the front of the room, heels clicking softly against the polished floor, feeling every pair of eyes on her. But this time, she felt the difference. She wasn't trying to dazzle or dominate. She was simply there to speak truth. I humiliated a good man in this room because I'd never been taught consequences, Angel began. Voice clear, carrying through the room with calm authority, never learned to see people as human. I thought money made me superior. I thought my skin color gave me the right to judge. I was wrong, and I am deeply sorry. She turned slightly, eyes meeting Andrew's across the crowd. Mr. Carter taught me more in 6 months than I'd learned in 22 years. Not through kindness I deserved, but through fairness I didn't. He taught me humility, accountability, and the power of seeing the world as it truly is. Andrew stepped forward, nodding subtly, a small smile touching the corners of his mouth. Richard joined them, placing a steadying hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Andrew and I have an announcement," Richard said, voice now carrying pride alongside gravity. "Not only are we moving forward with our original $520 million partnership," polite applause rose from the crowd, tentative but real, "but we're expanding it to $1.2 billion, creating 150,000 jobs, and establishing the Carter Whitmore Foundation for Economic Justice." The applause grew, stronger, more genuine. Angel felt warmth flooding her chest, not the artificial warmth of attention or validation, but something deeper, rooted in acknowledgement and redemption. She took a breath, letting her voice carry the sincerity she had nurtured over months. 10% of all foundation funds will go to communities most affected by economic and racial inequality. Communities I once looked down on, communities whose struggles I was blind to, and whose dignity I failed to see. I will work every day to help these communities, not because it benefits me, but because it is right. Andrew finally spoke, the calm authority he always carried softened with emotion. This story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when we hold each other accountable, when privilege meets consequence, when change becomes possible. And it's about seeing each other as human beings worthy of both challenge and compassion. He looked directly at Angel. 6 months ago, I wanted nothing to do with this family. Today, I am proud to work alongside both of them. Later, as the room slowly emptied, Angel found Andrew on the balcony. The city lights stretched before them, a glittering testament to human ambition and resilience. "I never thanked you," Angel said, voice small but steady, "for not giving up on me." Andrew smiled gently, leaning against the railing. "My mother always said people can change if they want to badly enough. You wanted to." "I see the world differently now," she admitted. "I see people. I see struggles I never knew existed. That's all any of us can do," Andrew said. "Open our eyes and do better." Richard joined them, placing an arm around his daughter. "Thank you, Andrew, for giving us both a second chance." Andrew shook his head, warm but firm. "Thank you for trusting me with the hard work of accountability." Angel gazed at the reflection of the city in the glass, then at herself. The face looking back was familiar, but transformed. She barely recognized the woman who had stormed through a penthouse 6 months ago, flinging champagne, full of entitlement and arrogance. That woman had lost everything, her money, her pride, her delusions, but in the process, she had found something infinitely more valuable: her humanity. The viral video still existed, permanent and unflinching, a record of her worst moment. But now, when people searched her name, they would also find stories of the foundation, of her dedication to economic justice, of her transformation from privilege blindness to empathy, responsibility, and active change. Angel Whitmore was no longer the champagne girl. She was a woman who had learned the hardest lesson privilege can teach, that worth isn't measured in dollars, and dignity isn't determined by skin color, and that sometimes the greatest revenge is giving someone the chance to become worthy of forgiveness. She exhaled, shoulders finally relaxed, the cool night air on her face carrying the promise of tomorrow. There was work to be done, communities to help, and a life to live differently, for herself and for those who deserved a voice she had once ignored. Angel knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time, she felt ready, whole, human, capable of change. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring transformations, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Join us and never miss a journey of growth, redemption, and hope.